If I were to ask you what your greatest treasure is, I'm sure there would be a great variety of answers, but the most common would probably be family, a life accomplishment, or a job or health. These are all great answers. However, there are some treasures that we take for granted that supersede each of these responses. These are air, water, and food. Without air, we would not live more than a few minutes. Without water, we would not live more than a few weeks. Without food, we could not last more than several months. The reason we probably do not think of these as our greatest treasure is simply because they are so essential and, for the most part, omnipresent. We take these greatest of treasures for granted. Legislation and laws operate the same way. The things that we take for granted in our society are not legislated into existence. We enact laws to guarantee secondary rights or to discourage bad behavior. We take it for granted in our society that people should be kind to one another and that we should respect each other. No laws can or ever will be written to force people to kindness and civility. In the Constitution of our country, we have a Bill of Rights that guarantees these secondary rights: the right to worship, the right of assembly, the right to free speech, the right to bear arms. None of these rights is absolute. The right to worship must meet certain standards and is checked by tax laws. The right of assembly is restricted by local police who grant or deny permits for marches and protests. The right of free speech is restricted by libel and slander laws. These secondary rights would not exist if it were not for the primary rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are God-given rights. Without life, no rights would exist at all. Without liberty, the mention and thought of rights is not possible. Without the pursuit of happiness, all rights would lack meaning. While life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, they are not referenced in the Constitution. We as a people and our lawmakers take these for granted, and that is a good thing. A government can't force people to live. It cannot legislate freedom because it comes as a God-given right. It is impossible to have people pursue happiness if they choose to be miserable or angry. The news of the past few weeks raises some questions for us about the conflict of rights. Currently, we are involved in a national discussion about the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Guns and violence have become so prevalent that they threaten life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms currently has the least restrictions on a national level of all the rights. For me, this is much more a question of morality than a political issue. The question before us is, what is more important, the secondary right to bear arms or the primary God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? We need to find a balance here. If you fear for your life every time you enter a public place, like a supermarket, a school, a Walmart, a nightclub, or a movie theater, you are on the verge of losing your right to life. If you don't feel free to go where you want to go because of fear, you have lost your liberty. How can one pursue happiness when preoccupied with dread and suspicion? Those in favor of unlimited gun rights are putting forward false arguments to distract us from the real issue. They blame video games as creating a society of violence. If that were true, and it is not, then Japan and China, each of which has a video game market penetration rate comparable to the United States, would have mass shootings. They do not. Supporters of unlimited gun rights shift the blame to the mentally ill. This is another Trojan horse. This is the same strategy that is used to address the ills of our nation. Let's blame the immigrants rather than fix the problems ourselves. it stokes hatred and makes the situation worse rather than better. The mentally ill are much more likely to be victims of violence than to be the perpetrators of it. Most countries in the world have mentally ill people in the same proportion that we do here in the United States, and yet there are no mass killings there. The only common thread is all mass shootings is the availability and access to weapons of war. Let us not fool ourselves any longer. Let us stop giving credence to the lies. Currently in Texas, in order to touch someone else's hair, or to become a hairdresser or a barber, a person must undergo and pass a certified course that teaches about hygiene and the danger of the chemicals that they work with. On the other hand, an 18-year-old can buy 2 assault-style weapons and no questions are asked. In Texas, to adopt a kitten or a puppy, a person needs to apply for a license. On the other hand, an 18-year-old boy can buy 700 pieces of ammo with a quick-loading cartridge and no questions are asked. We need some common sense legislation. In 2020, there were 45,222 gun deaths in the United States. Of the 45,222 gun deaths, over 10,000 were young Americans under the age of 18. Of the 45,222 gun deaths, over half were suicide, 51%. Of the 45,222 gun deaths, 19,384 were murders. In 1 year, from 2019 to 2020, this overall total rose 14%. Since 2010, in 10 years, the number of total gun deaths has risen 75% in our country. We are like the proverbial frog sitting in the pot of boiling water. We have become complacent because every night when we watch the news, we hear of more and more killings. Unfortunately, it does not shock us anymore. By our complacency, we have accepted violence and murder as part of our daily lives. This is so sad. Last year, in 2021, 1,500 children, those under 18, were killed by guns. In 2020, the total was 1,380, nearly a 10% rise. It has been 10 years since the school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut, and as of this past week, there have been over 900 shootings on school grounds since Sandy Hook. Lastly, for 60 years, the leading cause of death for children has been auto accidents. Since 2017, the leading cause of death for children is now gun violence. We have made cars safer, but we have done little, if anything, to make schools and children safer. Police and law enforcement officers are also under assault. The number of police killed by guns in the line of duty rose 36% from 2020 to 2021. We are in a crisis. I come from an NRA family. I grew up on a farm and we had guns in the house all the time. Guns are part of the frontier heritage of our nation. My father, brother, and uncles were and are all hunters, and the game they caught has provided food for our family table for many years. I do not support the banning of all guns. However, I believe that there is no need for the ordinary citizen to possess or have access to assault weapons or instruments of war. Background checks for purchasers of guns is a good start, but it should not stop there. There should also be training and competency standards. Gun violence is as much a pro-life issue as is abortion. Innocent children are dying. Policemen are being killed. At the moment of the Ascension, the feast that we celebrate today, the last words of Jesus to his followers were that they are to be his witnesses to the ends of the earth. The Greek word here is martyres. To be a witness means that we do not sit passively by when people are being innocently killed. To be a martyr means to speak up and to stand up for the truth. We cannot take our God-given gifts for granted, It is time to speak up and to stand up for our rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we do not do something, we will eventually lose these blessings. We must not give in to complacency and say that nothing can be done. Our Christian calling demands that we do something, if not for ourselves, then for our neighbors, for our children, and for our descendants. Just as all the other rights in the Bill of Rights have restrictions so that the right itself is not abused, so should the right to bear arms have restrictions so it is not abused. God has granted us the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Indeed, much has been given to us, and so now much is expected of us. Let us speak up and do the right thing so we can preserve our God-given rights and bring an end to the senseless violence that confronts us daily. If not for yourself, please do it for your children.